Number five, what are some possible organizational constraints and how could they lead to counterproductive behavior? So, um, old organizational constraints are anything that is going to hinder the productivity of employees and staff at work. Um, in a big umbrella, organizational constraints can be um, like the lack of resources, or the lack of management or communication from management in regards to policies and expectations, things of that nature. All of these can lead to counterproductive behaviors from the employees to the leaders at the job, the supervisors, managers, etc. Um, so leadership constraints are a big one. I'm going to touch on that in a minute. I'm going to name three. We're going to talk about we're going to talking about environmental constraints, which I briefly discussed, leadership constraints, and cultural constraints. Um, so the environmental constraints are issues that pertain to the environment. This can be improper ventilation, climate, meaning like the office space is too hot or too cold. There's not enough ventilation there. Um, Another example can be improper or inadequate technology, or like internet complications. All of these things can slow down the productivity of employees at work. So an example of an environmental constraints when we speak of not having the proper tools to do your job, like having one printer for 30 employees, and this printer continually jams or is backed up because everybody has to share one printer in the office, right? Leadership constraints. These constraints can vary in magnitude across organizations, but this is pretty much when the employees don't have the same vision or aren't aligned with the leaders, whether they just don't get along or don't feel like they have good leadership, right? And a lot of this can lead to employees seeking new forms of employment. An example of this would be like, say, if an employee doesn't feel listened to or respected by management when they bring their concerns to them time and time again, they probably aren't going to be likely to stay. The third one that I mentioned was the cultural constraints. These is much like the culture of the company, right? If the employee gets to an organization and figures out like, hey, this isn't the best fit for me, their vision, their values aren't really aligned with my own, right? So that could be a cultural constraint. Also, this could include management or supervisors telling the employees what they can do, or where they have to work, or who they can talk to, with whom, where they can talk, right? All of these constraints on the individual can that have to do on like that interaction basis can lead to cultural constraints. Um, Excuse me. The second part of the question was talking about how these can lead to counterproductive behaviors. So, counterproductive behaviors are essentially anything that is going to slow down or go against the productivity of the organization, right? Or when an individual, an employee, is going against the grain, going against the principles and the values of the organization. So, um, these behaviors can not only harm the organization, but they can also harm or hurt the people, other employees in that organization, right? Like if some employees feel like they work harder than others, but they're compensated the same, and they feel like they have to carry that person's workload. Other teammates will be upset, right? They might feel like they don't have to work as hard, right? There's no reprimand for this individual. Why do I have to keep my side of the bargain, type of thing, right? Some of these behaviors, counterproductive behaviors, can include absenteeism, which is just not showing up to work, abuse against others, either verbally or physical abuse, sexual harassment is along those lines, lateness, just, being late to work often, maybe not even every day, but often or frequently is still a problem, right? Cyberloafing, things like that. Well, actually, let me explain cyberloafing a little bit and more into detail. So, this is when an employee is surfing the web for like unrelated tasks, right? We all might be guilty of it to some extent, but um, when it really becomes a big part of your day, a big part of the time spent at work, that is going to be an issue, right? So the biggest platforms that are the culprits for cyber loafing are like social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Um, People watch videos at work, YouTube, Netflix, Hulu, etc. Right? All of these are taking away from the time that you should be devoted to doing tasks or assignments at work, right? So this is counterproductive behavior. Um, it's interesting now as, it's 2020 and technology is literally at our fingertips. Cyber loafing has become more of an issue because even though, employers can block sites, through their intranet or internet, um, you know, pretty much everybody has a smartphone. So they're able to get lost, literally get lost from cyber loafing, sorry, in their cell phone. I think.